Yate been. Good morning, my relatives. It's about 11:10 here in Washington, D.C., and I wanted just to get online and give an initial short reaction to the presidential address last night, as well as the GOP response. So I'm going to begin doing that in just a few minutes. But before I begin, let me start, as I always do, by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from Washington, D.C., which are the traditional lands of the Piscataway. And I want to thank the Piscataway and honor them as the host people, the stewards of these lands. And I want to state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. So last night, if you watched the presidential address and the GOP response, you probably had a lot of different reactions to it. Again, depending most likely on what party you follow, but there was enough for both sides to kind of affirm and get something out of the thing for both of the two major parties. First, I wanted to point out, because it really struck me. I watched a part of the address last night. I didn't watch the whole thing. I finished watching the rest of the address this morning. And before I went to bed last night, I just did some quick reading on the GOP response by Senator Tim Scott. And of course, the first comment that I saw was that he said in his remarks that America is not a racist country. And so that I actually had to hear that for myself. So I found his GOP response. It wasn't very long, maybe about 15 minutes. And so I watched that last night. And I responded initially, even last night, just on my Twitter. Because I had heard enough at that point of the president's address, of Joe Biden's words, to know that he was absolutely affirming American exceptionalism. And then to hear Tim Scott come on and say America is not a racist country. And if you've listened to me speak before, you know that both of those responses are addressed and directed towards white landowning men. Right, American exceptionalism is the coping mechanism of a nation that's in deep denial of its genocidal past, as well as its current racist reality. And so the way that you get white landowning men to vote for you, if you want to run for political office, is you affirm for them, you tell them how exceptional they are. And that's absolutely what Joe Biden does, and that's even what Tim Scott is doing, as has other minority candidates and politicians have learned how to do that as well. President Obama does it. Cory Booker does it. If you want to survive in national politics, you have to learn how to affirm the myth of American exceptionalism. Otherwise, you will not get the support of the white landowning male, which is crucial in the two-party system. And so it was a bit shocking, and I noticed there were even a few tweets challenging Senator Scott regarding his remarks that America is not a racist country. Because, right, we've been dealing with police shootings, we've been dealing with racial violence, we've been dealing with an unjust criminal justice system, and it is very apparent to many, many Americans, and the evidence is almost overwhelming, that America absolutely is a white supremacist and racist country. And so to have a black senator affirm to white landowning men that, no, this nation you've built is not racist, that is entirely meant to soothe their conscience. Remember, American exceptionalism is the coping mechanism. And so, and it's rooted in the lie of white supremacy. So I kind of went to bed with that on my mind last night, and I was very disappointed, right? Because all it does is it just affirms the myth and the lies that white politicians and even white Christians believe. We saw that earlier this week with the response, or the comments by Senator, what was his name, Santorum, where he said, Europeans came here and they found a blank slate and they built this beautiful country on Judeo-Christian values and blah, blah, blah. And right, this is all just a myth. This is the myth of American exceptionalism that completely, not even whitewashes, it just erases the genocide that was enacted by these European religious people so that they could have their blank continent to discover, So, and they never recorded that they ethnically cleansed it. They never recorded the incredible injustice and violence that they enacted as they completed their self-proclaimed manifest destiny. And right, so we love to call out the myth perpetuated by Senator Scott. We love to call out the remarks by former Senator, why can't I remember his name right now? It's for some reason it's not coming up in my mind. But anyway, Rick Santorum. Thank you. Someone said that. Yes, the Rick Santorum remarks. But those same sentiments were buried and peppered throughout President Biden's address. I don't know if you were listening, but maybe about 10 minutes into his address, when well, there's several things. First of all, I did appreciate the fact that President Biden acknowledged that he was the first president to address Madam Speaker and Madam Vice President. And that has never happened in our nation's history. And that was a significant moment. And I was glad that he acknowledged that it's been a long time coming, or it was long overdue, or something like that. However, I still felt like, because he's a white landowning male from the 1%, those words, it shouldn't have just been acknowledged, but it should have been followed up by a statement of lament, an apology, a mourning for what the demographic that he represents has done to this nation. Instead, he kind of took credit for what he had done. But there should have absolutely been a statement of lamentation or even apology for what the white landowning men of this nation have enacted on BIPOC and women throughout this nation's history. So I was a bit disappointed. I was grateful that it was acknowledged. I thought it could have definitely been a lot more strong. But then, as he was, again, about 10 minutes into his remarks, he was kind of in the middle of his part about infrastructure and why we need to make this multi-trillion-dollar investment in our infrastructure. And he referenced the legacy of Abraham Lincoln. And he said, whenever our country has invested in infrastructure, I forget exactly how he said it, whenever we've invested in our infrastructure, and then he referenced immediately the Transcontinental Railway and the national interstate roadways. And he said, when we connected the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean, we saw prosperity and we saw the economic benefits of these things. Now, if you follow my channel, you've listened to my lectures, you've read my book on Settling Truth, so you know what I'm going to say next. Yes, in 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Pacific Railway Act, which provided the land and the resources to complete the Transcontinental Railway. It had reached Omaha, Nebraska at that point. And he signed two bills, one in 1862, one in 1864, that allowed for the great progress and almost the completion of the Transcontinental Railway. But within 3 years of signing that bill, after the Bear River massacre of the Shoshone in the Utah, Wyoming, Colorado corner, after the hanging of the Dakota 38 and the canceling of the treaties with the Dakota and Winnebago and other Native nations in the state of Minnesota and their violent removal from that state, after the Sand Creek massacre in Colorado, and after with the Cheyenne and Arapaho, and after the Long Walk and the genocidal removal of Native peoples, the Navajo and the Mescalero Apache, from the Church of New Mexico into what can only be called a death camp at Fort Sumner. Abraham Lincoln wasn't just randomly attacking Native tribes. He was very strategic in removing tribes directly along the route of the Transcontinental Railway as he sought to complete our nation's self-proclaimed manifest destiny. literally making him one of the most genocidal presidents in our nation's history. And last night, President Joe Biden referenced that genocidal initiative. He said the Transcontinental Railway. He didn't say Manifest Destiny, but that's absolutely what it was. And that was literally the ethnic cleansing and genocide of Native peoples. And for him to reference that as a marker, as a milestone of look at how when we've invested in our infrastructure and we've had this incredible prosperity increase since then, in that same spirit, we must now invest in our infrastructure again. It's like, is there any kind of a test that these white politicians need to take to get into office? Is there anything they have to know about the history of the nation they're trying to lead? Or they just read the crap that's put in our textbooks and forget about it? I could not believe when he referenced the Transcontinental Railway and the completion of that as this great economic boom, when it literally came at the cost of incredible genocide of Native peoples. And it was hard to catch in there. It was in the first 10 minutes. I probably watched 15 minutes of the address last night, and then I turned it off. But I missed it in that first 15 minutes, and then when I watched the most of the address again, including half of that first 15 minutes, and I was sitting in my chair, actually right back here, watching on my television and kind of getting settled down, and I just heard the words Transcontinental Railway, and I'm like, what? And I paused it, I rewound the video, and I listened again, and I just sat there. I'm like, I can't believe he's holding that up, right? This is literally, if the Prime Minister of Germany would say to their people, remember the economic prosperity that was brought by Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime. And we are going to build on that legacy by investing in the infrastructure of Germany again. Now, everyone knows the investment and the prosperity of Nazi Germany before the end of World War II came at the literal cost of millions of lives of Jewish people. No leader of Germany would ever say that. And yet here is our president, the most progressive president we've had, and that's what just people call him. That's not what I agree with. And he is literally referencing this genocidal milestone in our nation's history, which is the completion of the Transcontinental Railway, the conclusion of Manifest Destiny. And he's holding that up as a milestone. I also paid very close attention when President Biden was talking about police reform. And he called white supremacy terrorism, which I appreciated that designation. I think it absolutely is terrorism. But what was fascinating is then he didn't go on to talk about it like it was an act of terrorism. Right? He already had affirmed one of the most genocidal acts of white supremacy in our nation's history, which was the genocide of Native peoples for the Transcontinental Railway. But then as he talked about the insurrection, which if you don't believe the insurrection was about white supremacy, you're just out of touch. It absolutely was about white supremacy. It was about trying to negate the vote of people of color so the white landowning male from the 1% would win. And if you don't see that, I can't help you. I don't know what else to say. But there was absolutely tinges of, and not only was it in the terrorists who overtook the Capitol, it was in our nation's response. Right? Think about Again, if you look at, even though they knew it was going to happen, they knew there was chatter going on, they knew that there was something that was going to happen, and our police force, our military did nothing. If this was BIPOC people coming, if this was people of Arab descent coming, Middle Eastern descent coming, there would have been tanks around the Capitol. But because it was white people, not only did they let them in, they helped them leave and didn't even arrest any of them, and then they're letting them out on bail. If you don't see the white supremacy in that, I don't know what to tell you. Because the reaction of what they did and what they allowed those white Christian nationalists to do, and what they would have ever allowed or have allowed BIPOC and other marginalized communities to do, are night and day different. And he talked about how we overcame this. We didn't overcome that. The guy who led it is sitting in Mar-a-Lago planning his next run, playing kingmaker over the GOP. We still have senators today spouting his lies that the election was stolen from him. White supremacy gained a stronger foothold because of what was enacted on January 6th. And we let it happen. We let those people out on bail. We let them go on their Mexican vacations. We let them do all these. We gave them, transferred them to more comfy prisons so they could eat vegan diets. So he said the word white supremacy is terrorism, but he does not act like the white people enacting those acts are terrorists. And again, this is the problem. And throughout his entire speech, especially including the crescendo at the end, where America can do anything it sets its mind to, and we're reclaiming our role of leadership in the world. This is just all rooted in the lie of white supremacy and the myth of American exceptionalism. The problem is, and I'm not denying America can accomplish a lot. It can. What it chooses to accomplish is questionable. We didn't choose to accomplish wearing masks and socially distancing in a national level. We had the worst COVID numbers of any country in the world. Now we're hoarding our vaccines. Unfortunately, the things that we put our mind to are all colonial. They're about protecting the majority, maintaining the status quo. That's what we put our mind to. And that's, yes, we've accomplished a lot through that. And if we don't include the enslavement of African people, we don't include the genocide of Native peoples, we look at the ongoing violence by our nation against people of color, it's just a spot, a blemish on our character. If we overlook all that, then, oh yes, we are a great prosperous nation who can accomplish anything. The problem, and then he even talked about how the idea is that America is an idea where all men are created equal. He said all people. Again, that's not what the founders said, and it's not what they meant either. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And 30 lines later, and many of those men were slave owners. So don't tell me they meant to include Black people. And 30 lines later, they referred to natives as savages. The idea America was founded on was white supremacy and racism and the centering of the white landowning male. That's the idea this nation was founded on. And until we can elect a president who's able to acknowledge that, we're not going to fix things. You've heard me say before, right? The GOP and the Dems, they're just two peas in the same pot. Republicans are explicitly white supremacist, racist, and sexist, which is why they needed a black senator to stand on a national stage and tell the white landowning men of the GOP, your country isn't racist. He had to say it so bluntly and specifically because the GOP is explicitly white supremacist, racist, and sexist. And so they had to say it very clearly to soothe their consciences. The Democrats are implicitly white supremacist, racist, and sexist. And so their white landowning men needed to be told, don't worry, you are still exceptional. And so last night, we didn't see a dueling of ideas. We saw a little bit about how much money they want to spend. But as far as their value to maintain the status quo and inch our way towards social change, President Joe Biden and Senator Tim Scott did a masterful presentation, coordinated effort of weaving in American exceptionalism and white supremacy, of speaking directly to their white landowning male bases and soothing their consciences, of letting BIPOC people know our place, which is if we want a spot in this conversation, at least at their table, under their banner, which is either the GOP or the Dems, then we have to, A, tell the white people explicitly that they're not racist if we want to be Republican. If we want to be Democrats, we just have to find all the creative and unique ways we can to tell white landowning men that they're still exceptional. And if we're willing to do that, there's absolutely a seat at the table for us. But that's not going to bring change. That's not going to bring change. And so the presentation you saw last night was absolutely about maintaining the status quo. It was about soothing the conscience of white landowning men, and it was about telling women and BIPOC what we need to do if we want a seat at their Democratic or Republican tables. And this is why, right? This is why I ran in 2020. This is why we need to remove the racism, the sexism, and the white supremacy from our very foundations. Joe Biden's not going to do it. He's still celebrating the Transcontinental Railway and worshiping Abraham Lincoln. The Republicans aren't going to do it. They're just going to find people of color, black people, who stand on their stage and tell them they're not racist. Neither side is interested in changing the status quo. So this is why we have to find a way around that. That's what I tried to do in 2020. This is what I'm thinking now, what's going to be the best way to move that dialogue forward. But this is the work that's ahead of us, our relatives. This is the work we have to do. We have to deconstruct the myths and the lies that were being fed by both sides of the aisle, that unfortunately is being repeated by our people of color. The Democrats and the Republicans are not interested in changing the status quo. Period. They're not. And if we wait for them to do it, it will be hundreds of years until we achieve those kind of goals. They are absolutely not interested. So we have to think more creatively and strategically about how do we move around those blocks that we have, especially politically. That's what I'm spending my time thinking about right now. That's what I'm trying to strategically plan over the next 2 years, and then whatever steps are going to take place after that. But these are the conversations we need to have. The United States of America absolutely needs a national dialogue on race, gender, and class. We absolutely need a common memory. We need to teach our true history. We need to decenter whiteness. We need to stop looking to the white landowning male from the 1% to save us. These are the things that we need. So we have to strategically work on how we get there. A big piece of that is teaching our history. The ignorance that, I just saw my battery's going to die here in a minute. The ignorance that we saw this last week by Rick Santorum, the lie that was told by Senator Tim Scott, the myth that was perpetuated by President Joe Biden, right? Some of that comes out of a historical ignorance. But a lot of it comes out of an intentional ignorance that's rooted in protecting and preserving white supremacy. They don't want to know that history. They don't want to look at those things. They don't want to be a part of it. And the media is a part of this. We know this too, but we'll talk about that later. So these are the things that we need to teach this history. This is why I wrote my book, Unsettling Truth. This is why I share my second cup of coffee with you so frequently, is because not only do I want to teach this history, I want to try to remove the veil, the lies, the implicit racism, sexism, white supremacy that we're being fed, as well as the explicit. I want to help make our nation more aware of what we're being told and what we're being fed, so that when it comes time to choose more leaders and to vote on different issues and to make decisions as a nation, we won't resort to just misquoting the Constitution, which is what President Obama did, or misquoting the Declaration of Independence, which is what Joe Biden does. Because we'll actually have done the work to make the changes to reflect the transformation that we need. These are my thoughts. I hope you have a good day, my relatives. I didn't watch the sunrise this morning because it was pretty cloudy. It's supposed to be clear tomorrow, so I'm hoping to watch the sunrise again tomorrow. And then also on Friday, I'm going to do another session on my book, Unsettling Truth, and I'll be talking more about that tomorrow. If you would like to join that, I'll be discussing that. And I'll put a link in my in the chat here. If you want a link to purchase a signed copy of Unsettling Truth, it's on my website. But walking, beating my relatives, I hope that you have a great day, and may we learn how to walk and beat it together. And hakonet.